A woman shows up on a forward base just hours before a critical mission, fully geared, deadly calm, and with no record of ever being assigned. She doesn't speak much, but one impossible shot in the middle of a mountain ambush turns every head, especially the colonel's. Who is she, and why does no one know her name? As her presence shakes the chain of command, one thing becomes clear. She's not here by accident. What happens when the truth finally surfaces? Before we go any further, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story might just change how you see everything. We're hosting A Man and Woman, commenting on the changes that television's healthcare, and Colonel Everett Lawson didn't tolerate variables. Not in his command center, not in his unit, and certainly not in the middle of a Black Ops mission poised to rewrite the balance of the Northern Corridor. He'd built his career on clean lines, clear orders, and absolute control, the kind that kept soldiers alive and careers intact. Which is why, when he first saw the woman, the tight muscle just above his jaw started to twitch. She was bending over a case of long-range optics, her hands moving with a precision that came from years of muscle memory. Not nervous, not overeager, like she'd done this 1,000 times in places she never talked about. Lawson stood behind the thick glass of the operations corridor, watching her through the security pane, arms folded tight against his chest. She didn't belong here. The mission roster was short. 24 personnel, all vetted, all accounted for. This one, tall, lean build, jet black tactical uniform like everyone else, was not on it. She had a regulation haircut, a name tag stitched in black on green that read Monroe, and a demeanor that set her apart from every operator in the prep bay. And had much deeper expertise than any spotting officer she'd ever. Lawson leaned slightly to the side, keeping her in view, and tapped the comm key on the wall. "Roar," he said, voice low and controlled. "Sir," came the reply after a few seconds. Lieutenant Mason Rourke was punctual. He was also the closest thing this base had to an unofficial historian. Nothing moved without him noting it down. "I need a positive ID on the woman calibrating sniper equipment near Bay 4. A pause. "Which woman, Colonel?" Lawson turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowed. "The one," he said, still staring through the glass. "The one who isn't supposed to exist." Silence crackled on the line, followed by hurried footsteps. Within moments, Rourke appeared beside him, eyes scanning the bay. He spotted her immediately. He squinted. "I don't know who that is, sir." Lawson didn't answer. Instead, he walked away from the window, leaving Rourke to catch up. They moved quickly through the corridor, past supply manifests, live feed screens, and drone telemetry. All the instruments of control Lawson had come to rely on. In his office, Lawson brought up the personnel files. One by one, they flicked across the screen. Face matches, call signs, deployment histories. He checked support staff, intel liaisons, even satellite team rosters. Nothing. No Monroe. "She's not in the system," Rock said behind him, trying to mask the unease in his voice. "She's wearing full active kit," Lawson replied. "How does someone get full-issue gear, sniper clearance, and base access without triggering a flag?" "Ghost protocol," Rourke offered, but even he knew how thin that sounded. "There's no ghost protocol on this mission," Lawson said coldly. "This isn't Daggerfall. We don't have embedded shadows." Lawson tapped a command into the console. Security footage came up. The morning's check-in log, every ID badge scanned at the gates. He ran it frame by frame. No Monroe. She hadn't entered through the main gates. "Run a sweep on base access logs," he said. "Now." "Already on it, sir." Rourke slid into the adjacent terminal. His fingers flew over the keys. Lawson didn't move. He was watching the footage again, this time focusing on when she first appeared on camera. 9:34. 1 second, the supply area was clear. The next, she was there. as if she'd stepped in from a frame someone had edited too quickly. Rourke swore under his breath. "Sir, she's not on any of the logs. No digital entry, no facial match from DefenseNet archives, nothing. She just shows up." Lawson's hand closed into a fist. Outside, the prep bay carried on like nothing was wrong. Operators ran diagnostics, armorers checked ammo trays, and Monroe, if that was even her name, was now sighting down the scope of a custom-built M2010 enhanced sniper rifle. Her grip, her body language, it was textbook. But not the kind of textbook you read in ROTC. This was the kind of comm you found on blacklists and burn notices. "Get Keller," Lawson said. "Now." Major Simon Keller arrived 5 minutes later, fresh from overseeing drone perimeter checks. He was steady, professional, and just as much of a control freak as Lawson, which is why Lawson trusted him. "She's not one of ours," Lawson said without preamble, "but she's acting like she's leading a team." Keller didn't ask for context. He simply turned toward the bay and scanned for her, found her instantly. "Yeah," he said, nodding once. "I clocked her earlier, thought she was one of the tech observers. She's carrying an M2010 and a sidearm. Tech observers don't get live loadouts." "Want me to pull her in?" Keller asked. Lawson stared through the glass. Monroe was now speaking to Sergeant Luke Trent, the quartermaster. Trent, a stickler for protocol, handed her an encrypted comm bead and 2 frag silencers. No hesitation, no sign that anything was out of place. "Yes," Lawson said slowly, "but not yet. I want to know who handed her access. Someone gave her gear, credentials, and a mission brief. Either someone's playing games with us, or she's here under orders we were never supposed to see." Keller raised an eyebrow. "You think she's off book?" "I think she's dangerous," Lawson said. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling growing at the base of his spine, a twinge of something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way the others instinctively gave her space, like a ripple through the team, unspoken but clear. This woman wasn't just some interloper. She was someone who had been where they'd been, and maybe further. "She's a ghost," Rourke murmured from behind them. Lawson didn't respond, but his silence said everything. Captain Dana Hale didn't like variables either, especially the kind that showed up in her comms room, asking questions she had no clearance to answer. When Specialist Elise Monroe appeared outside her terminal pod that morning, offering a calm nod and no small talk, Hale had assumed it was a system check or a last-minute integration. Nothing out of the ordinary, until she realized Monroe hadn't signed the logbook, hadn't scanned a badge, and somehow knew exactly where the secured lines were stored. Now, as Hale stood just outside the glass-lined communications bunker, arms crossed and one brow arched, she watched Monroe through the reflection in the terminal display. The woman was checking a frequency scrambler, her fingers moving with the kind of ease Hale associated with field intel agents or deep cover interceptors. Not snipers. Monroe hadn't asked for instructions. She'd simply walked in, picked up the hardware, and started checking lines like she'd run the whole setup in her sleep. And Hale, despite her years working classified comms from Kandahar to Kiev, couldn't shake the sense that Monroe wasn't just comfortable here. She belonged here. She finally cleared her throat. "Specialist," Hale said evenly, keeping her voice diplomatic but edged. "That's a secure system. Access requires dual auth sign-off." Monroe didn't look up. "It's not locked." At the point. Now Monroe did glance over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "I was under the impression we were hours from deployment," she said. "That's correct. And in your relay node was 2 Hz off standard calibration. Someone in the field could have paid for that." Hale stared at her. "How would you even know that unless—" "I've run this setup before," Monroe replied simply. In worse places. Where exactly? Monroe paused. Not hesitant, just measuring. Classified, she said. Hale stepped closer. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're going to get. Hale let the silence hang for a moment longer. She wasn't intimidated. Not exactly. But there was something in Monroe's eyes that put her on edge. Not just intensity. Stillness. A kind of discipline Hale had only seen in operators who had nothing left to prove. Operators who knew exactly what they were capable of and didn't need anyone's permission to do it. Outside the glass, Colonel Lawson entered the floor again, flanked by Major Keller. Both men walked like they were scanning for something specific. When Keller's eyes landed on Monroe, they stopped cold. "She's in my comms bay," Hale said aloud, though they couldn't hear her through the glass. "Good to know. We're all equally confused." Monroe stepped away from the equipment and gave Hale a slight nod. "It's solid now," she said. "No bleed-through. You'll be clear through the uplink corridor." Then she walked out, calm and silent, leaving the faintest trace of sandalwood in the air. Hale didn't exhale until the door shut behind her. Lawson intercepted her immediately. "She was in the comms room?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Acting like she ran the place," Hale said, annoyed but not rattled. "And she fixed a drift issue we didn't know we had." Keller frowned. "She's operating above spec in every department." "I want Trent pulled in," Lawson muttered. "She got her loadout somewhere. Gear, weapon, access. I want the paper trail, assuming there is one." As Hale tapped back into her system, flipping through logs and secondary inputs, something odd popped up in the activity grid. A line of code, buried beneath the usual access logs. That shouldn't have been there. "Colonel," she said, "you're going to want to see this." Lawson and Keller circled behind her as the screen filled with a complex hash string. It wasn't encrypted. Defense protocol. It was older. Deep-tier, black, Cold War relic levels of buried. An authorization handshake from a non-military signature. "That's CIA prefix," Keller said darkly. "But they haven't run shadow embeds through this corridor since before the drawdown." "No official tag," Hale added, "but this signal authorized Monroe's presence on base, backdated 36 hours, stamped by a user with defunct clearance tags." "Meaning?" Lawson said flatly. "Meaning someone cleared her to be here, but they did it using credentials that haven't existed in 5 years. Ghost routing. Somebody buried her on purpose." Lawson stared at the code. His fingers twitched, just once, before folding behind his back. "She doesn't show up in any of our feeds," he muttered. "She gets issued a full kit, and now this?" Keller glanced toward the prep bay. "You think she's rogue?" Lawson didn't answer immediately. "I think we're being tested," he said, "or played." An hour later, Monroe sat alone on an ammo crate just outside the mission bay. Her eyes were closed, rifle across her lap. Calm as ever. She didn't flinch when Lawson approached, nor when his shadow fell across her boots. Her eyes opened slowly. "Colonel," she said, "you've caused a lot of paperwork today. I imagine that's the least of your concerns." Lawson didn't smile. He didn't blink. Have recalled feeling, "How are you know why? I don't you well." The way she said it wasn't threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. It was simply true. Lawson crossed his arms. "You're not on the roster. I'm not supposed to be. You're not in the system. That's the point. Then help me understand. Because you've got a rifle, gear, access codes, and somehow my sergeant handed you live gear without blinking." "Because he recognized me." Lawson paused. "From where?" Monroe didn't look away. "Operation Verdant Claw. 30 clicks east of Basra. We lost a team to false intel and 2 drones to bad coordinates. I pulled your sergeant out of a collapsed stairwell with half his leg shredded. He didn't see me then, but somewhere it clicked. Lawson's jaw tensed. "That op was redacted," he said. "Only 10 people in CENTCOM even knew we were in that zone. And 3 of them are buried in Arlington." Lawson took a step closer. "So what are you then? Langley? JSOC? A ghost asset?" "I'm someone who finishes what she starts," Monroe said. Lawson studied her for a long moment. He didn't trust her. But something about the way she carried herself, the silence, the competence, the unshakable poise, made it impossible to ignore the simple fact that she was good. Too good to be an accident. He straightened. "You want to be part of this op, you follow my command." "Understood. You don't improvise. You don't vanish. You don't pull rank. You don't officially have." "Agreed. And if I find out you're here for any reason other than to help us get our people home..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Monroe nodded once. "Then I won't be..." Lawson turned and walked away. Behind him, Monroe closed her eyes again. Still, silent, waiting for the storm. Major Simon Keller stood with his hands on the edge of the field table, eyes fixed on the satellite projection blinking across the screen. The high-value target, Spectre, was on the move. Not confirmed visually yet, but the pattern was unmistakable. Crossbencher pings, relay silences, fresh chatter from known affiliates, all the signs that something was about to break wide open. "The valley corridor's heating up," he said, voice low. Colonel Lawson nodded beside him. "ETA on target. 16 hours, give or take. He's pushing through the rocks early. Probably thinks he can avoid drone sweep if he moves before our weather window." "Smart." "Not smart enough," Keller replied, then hesitated. "Unless..." Lawson looked over. "Unless what?" "Unless he knows we're watching, in which case this movement's meant to flush us." The colonel said nothing for a moment, just stared at the map. They'd both seen these games before, the feints, the fake transmissions, the run-silent maneuvers. Spectre wasn't a new threat. He was just one they hadn't been able to touch until now. But now they had the terrain, the timing, and a veteran team. And then they had her. Lawson's eyes narrowed. "Where's Monroe?" Keller gestured toward the firing range. "Last I saw, she was running sight drills." Lawson didn't move. "Alone? She prefers it that way." That much was obvious. Since the initial confrontation in the comms bay, Monroe had spoken only when spoken to. She didn't insert herself into strategy sessions. Didn't hover near the team. Didn't ask questions. But she was always listening, always observing. And always, always 2 steps ahead. Keller tapped the table's edge. "Sir, if I may..." Lawson cut him off. "I'm not sure what game she's playing either, Simon, but the fact remains she hasn't done anything wrong. Yet. That's the problem," Keller said. "She's too clean. No one's that clean." Outside, the sun dropped fast behind the ridge. Long shadows stretched across the valley, touching the edges of the base's north perimeter. And down in the gravel wash near the shooting berm, Monroe lay flat on her stomach, rifle resting on a bipod, eyes cold and unblinking behind the scope. She fired once. Separation. A clean hit. 900 yards. Snapped into the edge of a steel target barely the size of a dinner plate. No exhale, no drift. Sergeant Luke Trent stood nearby, arms crossed. He'd seen plenty of sharpshooters over the years, but there was something different in the way she handled the rifle. She didn't treat it like a weapon. She treated it like a trusted companion, something that never failed her, because she never failed it. "You keep shooting like that," Trent said carefully, "and the others are going to start placing bets." Monroe blinked behind the scope, then lifted her head slowly. "I'm not here for bets." "Didn't think so." She sat up, unstrapped her elbows from the firing pad, and stood without a word. Trent studied her posture. Still balanced, not fatigued in the least. "You remember me," he said after a pause. She turned to him, gaze steady. "From Basra." He nodded. "Didn't know it was you then. I was bleeding out, half buried in debris. Only saw your boots. But I never forgot the voice." Monroe's eyes softened just a fraction. "You had a piece of rebar through your thigh. Still got the scar." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by wind and steel and the quiet hum of the desert night. "You never said anything," he finally added. "No one was supposed to." Trent chuckled quietly. "Still, you saved my life. It wasn't just yours." Monroe turned to leave, but Trent called after her. "You trust the colonel?" She paused. "I trust his record. They did what I asked." Monroe didn't reply. Then, "I trust he won't hesitate when it counts." And with that she disappeared into the twilight. Back in the operations tent, Keller flipped through the fresh recon data from the drone feeds. The HVT's convoy was moving through a narrow choke point flanked by ridges, a dangerous stretch known for ambushes and landslides. And now they had confirmation. 3 SUVs, 6 guards, 1 satellite dish. It was him. They finally had Spectre in the open. Lawson stood silently as Keller outlined the likely intercept zone. "Best windows between Grid Echo 3 and Foxtrot 1, Keller said. "If we plant our sniper team on the eastern slope, they'll have a clean shot through the bottleneck." Lawson nodded slowly. "And the sniper?" Keller hesitated. "Cameron's good," he said, "but I'd put Monroe on the ridge." Lawson raised an eyebrow. "You changed your mind?" "I haven't changed anything. But if this comes down to one shot, I want it taken by someone who doesn't blink." Lawson looked down at the tablet again. "She may be off the books," Keller said, "but she's real. And she's the only reason half the team isn't questioning this op." Lawson's mind raced. The moment she'd taken over the rifle, the way she'd anticipated frequencies in the comms room, the authority she'd never asked for, but everyone instinctively deferred to, like gravity. "Put her on the slope," he said finally. "Pair her with Rourke. He knows the contour." Keller nodded. "And Simon," Lawson added, "if she deviates from orders. I'll be watching." Hours later, deep in the foothills beyond the outer fence, Monroe sat crouched beneath the dark rise of Echo Ridge. Her rifle was slung, and her eyes scanned the terrain. Rourke knelt beside her, binoculars raised, breathing slow and even. "I'll admit," he muttered, "I thought you were going to be a problem." Monroe didn't look at him. "And now?" "You're still a problem, just one I'm glad is on our side." She allowed herself the faintest curve of a smile. Ahead of them, the terrain fell into shadow, the only light coming from faint IR tags blinking through drone relay. They were close. Spectre's convoy was less than 10 minutes out. Monroe adjusted her scope. The wind whispered against her cheek. Everything fell away, no thoughts, no questions, no name. Just the mission, just the math. Just the moment before the shot. She didn't need orders. She already knew what had to be done. The convoy entered the kill zone just past 200 hours, right on schedule. 3 matte black SUVs, headlights off, engines throttled below. Their tires rolled over rock and dust without pause, cutting a steady line through the narrow, winding pass that twisted like a scar between 2 cliffs. Up on the eastern slope, half buried in shadows and brush, Monroe lay motionless, her cheek pressed into the stock of her rifle, and her right eye blinked slowly behind the scope, as if tracking time itself. She had been waiting for 47 minutes. Beside her, Rourke checked the thermal scope mounted to his spotting gear. Each silhouette in the vehicles glowed like a phantom, heat signatures pure and undisturbed, no signs of decoys. He whispered into his mic, low and even. 3 vehicles, 5 passengers total, 1 rear seat, center vehicle. Still can't confirm facial, but pattern fits. That's Spectre. Back in the ops tent, Keller's voice came across the feed. Hold fire, we need him breathing. Monroe didn't respond. She made a microscopic adjustment to her scope, tracking the lead SUV's bumper with a stillness that made Rourke's skin crawl. She wasn't just calm. She was empty, like she'd hollowed herself out for the shot, and everything that made her human had been placed to the side. Then came the voice. Lawson's. Confirm no civvies in the area, no contractors, no wildlife, no chance of obstruction. Rourke checked his thermal again. Clear. Nothing on foot. Nothing warm except them and us. Lawson gave the order. Sniper, hold final aim. Await my mark. The seconds stretched long. The vehicles moved into full view. Halfway through the bottleneck now, both cliffs tightening around them. The kill zone had been measured with clinical precision. 1 direction in, 1 way out. Perfect for an ambush. Even more perfect for a trap. Monroe kept her eye locked on the center vehicle. Through the lens she could see the faint glint of a wristwatch. Right hand, male, passenger side back seat. That was him. Spectre. The man who'd bankrolled 3 bombings and disappeared into the ether for almost a year. She knew the dossier by heart. She knew what he'd done. And she knew that orders said capture, not kill. But her finger never touched the trigger. Then something shifted. Rourke tensed. Movement. Left slope, he whispered. 2 heat signatures. No, 3. Advancing fast. Lawson came through instantly. Say again? We've got shadows moving on the convoy. Side approach. They're not ours. In the command tent, alarms flared to life. Drone footage showed 3 figures emerging from a rocky ledge west of the kill zone, each armed, each closing on the middle SUV. Hostiles, Keller snapped. Confirm weapons? Rourke zoomed in. Affirm. RPG. RPG confirmed. And that was when Monroe took the shot. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't debate. It was gravity. The .300 Winchester round left her barrel with a sound like a god whispering through steel. It tore through the night and struck the lead hostile mid-torso, flipping him backwards before his finger could hit the dirt. The second fell before his knees hit the dirt. The third tried to run, but Monroe didn't miss moving targets either. Lazare. 3 bodies. 3 seconds. And then silence. A silence so thick Rourke forgot to breathe. Command, this is Ridge 1, he said finally. Engagement complete. 3 hostiles down. Threat neutralized. Sniper, confirm status, Lawson said, his voice sharper now. Monroe exhaled once. Weapon cold. All targets clean. But they weren't done. In the pass below, the convoy panicked. The driver of the second SUV threw the vehicle into reverse, backing into the lead car and forcing both into a locked position. Guards poured out, 4 of them, rifles raised, scanning the ridgelines for whatever Spectre had hunted their men. And then the bullets came. Not from Monroe, from the rocks above the southern ridge. An ambush on them. Automatic fire cascaded down from a perch high above the convoy. A half-dozen muzzle flashes blinked through the night. Someone had baited the convoy into a trap, and they'd almost walked right into it. Shots fired from high south, Rourke called. Coordinates incoming. In the chaos, one of the guards opened the rear passenger door of the center vehicle, dragging Spectre out of the back seat. The target stumbled. Confused. Unarmed, but still alive. Monroe shifted her angle. No shot, she said flatly. He's shielded. Lawson's voice was in her ear again. All teams. Phase 2, intercept. Air team on approach. Sniper team hold visual. Do not engage target unless lethal force is authorized. She heard the order, she followed it. But Rourke didn't. Not with words, with breath. He exhaled, deep and uneasy, the kind of breath you take when you know something's coming. Something worse than a firefight, something deliberate. And that's when the explosion hit. The third SUV, the tail vehicle, erupted in flame, shrapnel bursting into the night sky. The blast rocked the pass, flipping the lead SUV on its side and setting off secondary charges that lit the cliffs in orange fire. The guards screamed. Monroe didn't move. Rourke covered his head. And then, impossibly, through the smoke, she saw Spectre run. Not stumble. Round. Right toward the ridgeline, toward the enemy fire. "He's making a break," she said calmly. "Do not shoot," Keller shouted over the comms. "Repeat, hold fire." Monroe didn't shoot. She slid her rifle back, sat up, and reached for her secondary, a compact Glock locked to her thigh rig. "I'm going down there," she said. "Stand down, specialist," Lawson warned. "You're not cleared for ground pursuit." But she was already moving. Before Rourke could stop her, Monroe vaulted down the rocks like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her silhouette vanished into the smoke and shadows, like a ghost walking into a storm. 15 minutes later, the chaos died. The ambush team on the southern ridge had been neutralized by aerial support. The fires were controlled. 3 members of Spectre's convoy were dead, 1 wounded, 1 missing. Many others. And Spectre himself, the ghost they'd chased for 18 months, was on the ground, unconscious, zip-tied, and breathing. It was Monroe who dragged him back into the light, covered in soot, her sleeve torn, blood on her collar that wasn't her own. She didn't speak as she dropped the target at Keller's feet. "It's all yours," she said, then walked away. Lawson stood nearby. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just watched her walk through the smoke like it didn't touch her. Like it knew better than to try. The medical bay was quiet, save for the soft whirring of machines monitoring a man the world thought couldn't be found. Spectre lay unconscious, hooked to an IV, his face pale against the antiseptic white of the cot. 2 armed guards flanked the entrance, their fingers draped casually over triggers, but eyes sharp, scanning every movement like they expected shadows to bleed through the walls. Colonel Lawson stood just outside the blast-proof glass, arms folded, jaw clenched. He hadn't spoken in over 5 minutes. Not since Monroe dropped Spectre at his feet. Not since she walked past every stunned operator like the entire engagement had been a training run and not the chaos of a near-failed op. She hadn't looked proud. She hadn't even looked relieved. Just done, like her part was over. Except it wasn't. Not even close. "You sure he's stable?" Lawson asked. Major Keller nodded, glancing at the screen, where Spectre's vitals flickered in steady rhythm. "He'll wake up," Keller said. "Maybe in a few hours, maybe less." Lawson didn't move. "That's not what I'm asking." Keller gave him a side glance. "If you mean will he talk, I have no idea, but I can tell you this. He's not who we thought he was." "What makes you say that?" "Because when Monroe found him, he wasn't running away from the ambush." Lawson turned his head slowly. "Go on." "He was running toward it." Keller said nothing more. He didn't have to. The implication sat there, heavy as a lead weight. Spectre had known about the ambush, maybe orchestrated it, maybe expected to be killed in it, but instead of being taken out, he was caught, alive, by the one person who wasn't even supposed to be part of the mission. Lawson's hand twitched. "Where is she now?" "In her bunk, supposedly." "Get Rourke, and pull every security file we have. I want her entire footprint tracked from the second she touched this base." Keller hesitated. "She saved the op, Colonel. That doesn't make her one of us." 10 minutes later, Rourke stood in the main server room, blinking at his screen like it had just insulted him. Lines of code scrolled down, endless loops of base entry logs, surveillance feeds, badge scans, personnel clearance tracks. And in every single one, Monroe was missing. Not invisible. Absent. It was as if she'd never been recorded. No facial ID, no corridor logs, not even a reflection caught by a hallway camera. "She's not here," Rourke said, his voice flat over the comms. "Check again?" Keller replied. "I've checked 6 times. Lawson's voice joined the channel, colder than the steel floors beneath their boots. "Use the back end." "The back end?" "The shadow archive," Lawson said. "The protocol they never list on the org charts. You know the one." Rourke exhaled and keyed in a string of commands he hadn't used since deployment in Syria 4 years earlier. The system didn't ask for confirmation. It simply unlocked. And there, behind a firewall buried deeper than most defense contractors knew existed, was a single file. Encrypted, non-standard header, no metadata, only a name, Elise Monroe. Rourke stared at it. Got something. Keller and Lawson leaned over his shoulder as he opened it. The file contained no photo, no date of birth, no service number, just operational logs, dozens of them, each one marked with redacted tags and phrases like Tier 0 clearance, counter-satellite intervention, non-attribution asset. Then came the mission names. Some known, most buried. Some Lawson hadn't heard mentioned in over a decade. Verdant Claw, Iron Drift, Operation Threshold. But one stood out. Blizzard Echo. Lawson's brow furrowed. "That's not possible." "I thought that op was burned," Keller said. It was. Everyone on that team was listed KIA. Including the sniper that took the final shot. Rourke clicked the final line in the file. The text loaded slowly. "Asset confirmed as non-official personnel following Blizzard Echo. Field clearance retained under conditional mandate. Deployment authorization granted through division not listed under Department of Defense or CIA authority. Handler unknown. Status autonomous operative." Lawson leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "She's not just off the books," he muttered. "She is the book." Keller stared at the screen. "Who authorizes something like this?" Lawson said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, "No one who leaves a signature." Monroe sat alone in the armory corridor, staring at the inside of her rifle case. She hadn't changed clothes since the extraction. The blood still stained her collar. She'd cleaned her weapon with a mechanical precision, hands moving as if on autopilot. She didn't seem tired. She didn't seem alert either. She just... What? Hales stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Watching. "Do you ever plan to tell us?" she asked. Monroe didn't look up. "Tell you what?" "That you've been working ops no one's even supposed to know exist. That you're not just a sniper. You're a black asset. A ghost." Monroe snapped the rifle case shut. "Would it have changed anything?" "Yeah," Hales said. "We'd have asked a lot more questions before putting you on a cliff with a long gun." Monroe finally looked at her. "And I'd have walked. You're not afraid of getting pulled." "I've already been pulled," she said quietly. "Everything after that is borrowed time." Hale hesitated. Something in Monroe's voice had cracked for just a second. The faintest trace of something human under all that steel. But it was gone now. "You don't have a rank, do you?" Hale asked. "Not one that matters." "Then what do you want?" Monroe stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "To finish what I started." "Hence, what's that?" Monroe passed her without another word. Lawson stood in the hallway as she approached, his arms at his sides, his gaze fixed. He didn't speak until she was right in front of him. I read your file. You weren't supposed to. I did anyway. Monroe met his eyes. Then you know I shouldn't be here. I know someone wanted you here badly enough to erase every other trace of your existence to make it happen. Then you understand why you shouldn't trust me. I don't. Lawson said plainly. Good. But I trust results. Yours just saved a dozen lives. She didn't nod, didn't thank him. He continued. That doesn't make you one of us, but it means you're not the enemy. Not today, she replied softly. And for the first time Lawson saw it, not just discipline or skill, but pain. Real pain. Something she carried every day without complaint. And suddenly he understood. She didn't want trust. She wanted redemption. But redemption came with a price. And Monroe looked ready to pay every cent. The debrief room had no windows, just steel walls, 2 chairs, and a single table with a folder no one had dared open. Spectre sat in one chair, shackled but upright, his eyes half-lidded but aware. A man used to control, now reduced to silence. Across from him Major Keller waited, voice recorder active, gloves on, every question calibrated to avoid anything that might trigger diplomatic entanglements. The air was tight with tension. Let's start simple, Keller said. Name? Spectre gave a dry, humorless laugh. If you don't already know that, you brought the wrong sniper. Keller didn't blink. Why did you run toward the ambush? Spectre leaned forward, chains clinking softly. Because I needed to be caught. Keller narrowed his eyes, explained. Didn't trust the ones who came for me. Trusted the ones trying to stop them. Keller paused. You're saying someone else was after you? No, Spectre said, a faint grin crawling across his face. I'm saying someone from your side was about to erase me. There it was. The fracture line. The moment something shifted in the room. The idea that the real threat wasn't out there in the dust or hiding in the hills. It was here, inside, wearing the same uniforms, saluting the same flags. Keller rose from his seat. Outside the room, Colonel Lawson watched the feed in grim silence. The revelation wasn't entirely unexpected, but hearing it from Spectre's mouth gave it weight. It confirmed what he had begun to suspect after reviewing Monroe's file. Someone within their own command structure had sent her. Not to assist. To intervene. Rourke appeared at Lawson's side, tablet in hand. We pulled all outbound communications logs from the last 72 hours, Rourke said. No breaches in encryption, but we found a flash packet sent just hours before Monroe arrived. Encrypted, short burst. Old frequency. Lawson took the tablet and scanned the packet. It was small, just a few kilobytes, but the sender's tag was unmistakable. Captain Dana Hale. His stomach dropped. Find her, Lawson said. Now. Hale wasn't in her bunk. She wasn't in the comms room either. She was 2 miles outside the perimeter, crouched near a signal repeater, her portable sat-lank still warm, the digital readout still blinking. By the time Rourke and Trent arrived, she'd already powered it down, but not fast enough. What the hell are you doing out here? Trent demanded, rifle raised but finger off the trigger. Hale didn't answer. Hands where I can see them, Rourke added. She lifted her palms slowly, calmly. You think I'm a traitor? Am I going to find an answer to that on your device? Rourke asked. No, she said, because the answer isn't on a device. It's in what you don't know. Trent stepped forward, restraining her while Rourke accessed the sat-link. It was wiped. Of course it was wiped. Who did you contact? Rourke asked. Hale turned her head, not resisting, not protesting. The ones who wrote Monroe's orders. The ones you don't even know exist. Who are they? The reason we're not all dead. Back at base, Monroe stood near the armory, eyes closed, her hands resting lightly against the cold steel door. She'd felt the shift in the air before anyone said a word. Heard it in the way people stopped mid-sentence when she passed, in the low frequency of whispered conversations trailing behind her. Keller approached from the south wing. "You knew," he said flatly. "I suspected," she replied. "The hail was the leak?" "No," Monroe said. "That someone had to be. It's the only way I got the clearance I did. That kind of thing doesn't happen by accident, not at this level. She's not resisting." "She wouldn't." Keller looked at her hard. "Why not?" "Because she doesn't believe she did anything wrong." Lawson stood over Hale's restraints, arms behind his back, face unreadable. "You risked an entire mission. You buried a communication packet in a ghost channel. You leaked movement orders. You compromised base security." "I did what I had to do," Hale said. "You jeopardized your team." "No," she said sharply. "I protected them." Lawson said nothing. "You think this was about ambition, about intel?" she continued. "They told me this op would be burned before it began. That Spectre wasn't the priority. Monroe was." "That name again." "That name." Lawson leaned forward, voice low. "Explain." "She wasn't sent to save this mission. She was the mission. Her success or failure would determine whether a deeper program remained viable." "In the deeper program?" Hale just looked at him. "Do you really think she's the only one?" Meanwhile, Monroe found herself walking the edge of the base, the perimeter lights casting long shadows as she passed. The wind cut hard against her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. She had spent years working behind curtains where even her allies didn't know her face, where failure didn't mean paperwork. It meant a closed casket and a story that never got told. Now she could feel it closing again, the curtain, the silence. Keller caught up to her near the supply depot. "We're pulling Hale back to command," he said. "She's being reassigned for extraction." "Where?" Feeling discouraged. "Doesn't matter." Monroe didn't ask again. Keller stopped walking. "She said you were the mission." Monroe turned to face him. "She's not wrong," she said. "They sent me because someone needed to be here when the real threat showed up." "And Spectre wasn't the real threat?" "Not entirely." Keller's voice dropped. "Then what is?" Monroe took a long breath, her eyes scanning the dark ridgelines beyond the fences. "The next phase," she said. "This mission was never about just one man. It was about testing the chain of command, seeing who bent, who broke, who stayed quiet. Like you, I was the canary in the mine." Keller stood quietly, arms crossed. "You still think we're worth saving?" he asked. Monroe didn't hesitate. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Inside the ops tent, Lawson made his final report. Spectre secured. Hostiles neutralized. But behind the bullet points and battle logs, he added one line, just for himself. "Asset Monroe, status unlisted. Capability exceeds standard classification. Recommend review at Joint Command." He stared at the cursor blinking at the end of the line, then slowly he deleted the sentence. Some things didn't belong in files. Some things lived between the lines. And Monroe was one of them. As dawn cracked over the ridges, painting the base in pale gold, Monroe sat quietly on the edge of a supply crate, watching the light touch the earth. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But her eyes were calm, not because she was at peace, but because the mission was still going. She just wasn't sure where it led next. Not yet. But she'd be ready when it came. Colonel Lawson stood at parade rest beside the helipad, his eyes locked on the horizon where the sky was starting to shift from steel gray to soft amber. The air was crisp, sharp with the bite of altitude, and every inch of the base felt unusually still. The operation was over. Reports filed. Debriefs complete. The cleanup team from Northern Command had arrived late in the night and would be gone by noon. In another 48 hours, the base would power down to skeleton crew. But one matter remained unfinished. She stood 10 feet away. Monroe. Same gear, same calm presence, same silent weight she carried like part of her own spine. Her eyes, as always, scanned the field with that uncanny stillness, taking in exits, cover, and angles. Even now, even in peace, she was wired for war. Lawson walked to her with slow, deliberate steps. "They want you on the bird," he said. "Joint command. They're not saying much, but I assume they're going to ask questions." "They always do," Monroe replied. "You're planning on answering any of them?" She turned to him. "Depends on the questions." He paused. "You saved this op." Her face didn't change. "You saved my people," he added. Still, she didn't move. "So I made a call," Lawson said. "Back-channeled it. I had your name removed from all post-op reports. There's no mention of you, no acknowledgement, no record you were ever here." She looked up at him, finally. Her expression unreadable, but something faint flickered across it. Not surprise. More like acceptance. "You didn't have to," she said. "Yeah, I did," Lawson replied. "They'd chew you up, use you, or worse, decide they don't need you anymore. I wasn't going to let that happen, not after everything." He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket. A patch, black, clean, no division, no insignia, just a single stitched line across the center, simple, blank, silent. He extended it. "You wear this," he said, "and it means one thing. You don't belong to them. You don't belong to me. But if you ever need a place to land, a place where the noise quiets for a while, this patch gets you in." Monroe stared at it. Then, slowly, she took it. Her fingers curled around it with the same care she used to handle a rifle, as if it meant just as much. "I'll hold on to it," she said. "Good," Lawson nodded. "That's all I ask." Back inside the barracks, Rourke was packing up gear into an assault duffel when Monroe stepped in. He looked up, pausing mid-fold with a half-smile. "You made it through debrief without vanishing," he said. Briefly. "They're shipping you out?" She nodded once. "Where to?" "Nowhere they'll admit exists." He chuckled. "Figures." Then, more serious, "You okay?" Monroe didn't answer immediately. Then, "I've been worse." Not exactly a glowing endorsement. Not looking for one. He pulled something from his side pouch and held it out. A coin. Bronze. A unit challenge coin, worn and scratched from years of use. "You earned this," he said. "Your family." She took it with a tilt of her head. "I thought I wasn't on the roster." "You weren't," Rourke replied, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "But sometimes the best ones never are." In the comms bay, Hale stood under armed escort, hands cuffed loosely in front of her. She'd spoken little since the arrest, but when Monroe passed through the doorway, the escort stopped. "Give us a minute," Monroe said. The guard hesitated, then stepped back. Hale looked up at her. "You were never meant to see my face again," Monroe said. "Yet here we are. I read your message. Then you know I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Monroe said quietly. Hale exhaled, her voice tired. "I tried to warn them. Told them you weren't someone they could control, that if they sent you back in, there would be consequences." Monroe nodded once. "You were right." Hale looked her in the eyes. "Did you ever believe in what we were doing?" "For a time," Monroe said. "Then I saw who was signing the checks." A silence passed between them. Hale looked down at the floor. "They'll move me, quietly. You won't hear about it." "I never do." Monroe turned to leave, then paused. "You did the wrong thing for the right reasons," she said. "I won't forget that." The helicopter whirred to life at the edge of the base. Dust kicked up in violent spirals as the rotors spun faster, slicing the morning stillness apart. Monroe stepped up to the skids, her boots firm on the gravel. Keller approached with a sealed envelope in hand. "They said it's your next assignment," he said. "Didn't open it." "Neither will I," she replied. He stared at her. "What's really next for you?" Monroe looked up into the sky, the sun now breaking over the ridgeline in a blaze of gold. "Depends on where they've buried the next lie," she said. He extended a hand. She shook it. "For what it's worth," he said, "if we ever get in a fight again, I want you on my side from the beginning." "No," she said with a faint smirk. "You needed to see it first. All of it. You wouldn't have believed me otherwise." Keller nodded. "Fair." She stepped into the Berg. As the helicopter lifted, Lawson, Rourke, Keller, and even Trent stood below, watching her disappear into the rising sky. No salutes, no send-off, no ceremony, just respect. Earned the hard way. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at Lawson's private home, unmarked, no return address. Inside, a single item, the black patch he'd given her. But now, embroidered across the stitched line, were 3 letters. Ari. Lawson stared at it for a long time before placing it inside a drawer next to his service medal. He understood. Monroe hadn't come back, but she wasn't lost. She had chosen her path, one where she answered to no one but the mission, and wherever she was going next. Someone, somewhere, would be very lucky she showed up, because sometimes the best soldier in the field is the one who was never supposed to be there at all.